On behalf of our Lifelong Learning Committee, and with thanks to our presidents and leaders of the synagogue, and a mutual friend of our guest speaker, myself, Aliyah, who is the person who represents Eeta and arranged for her to be here tonight, I would like to welcome all of you to this program. Those of you at home, welcome as well. Eeta Prince-Gibson is the former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Port, which was one of my favorite newspaper magazines to receive. I had just admitted to her I haven't received it for some time. Of course, everything's available online. And she is a freelance journalist. She speaks all over the world. Debbie's also a freelance journalist. So you can, and is an expert on Israeli politics and Israeli society. So we're thrilled to have her here. Her family, her mom settled in Highland Park, New Jersey after her father, who was a conservative rabbi, passed away, and her brother lives in Highland Park, so it was a pretty easy trip to pick up Eeta tonight. So she's going to share with us a topic that literally at this moment in Israel is like still an active thing, just like it is in the United States as well. Why Israel has now had its 5th elections in 4 years, and what does that tell us or not? So thank you so much, Eeta, for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good evening. Thank you, Rabbi, and as you said, thank you to the woman who makes this happen, Aliyah Chekleskotel. And thank you for being here. Thank you all online. What I'm going to do, first of all, we have handouts here, and am I too close to? Okay. We have handouts here for the people in the audience, and I will try to share them a bit with you as well, who are streaming. I hope that what I'm going to be doing this evening by presenting some of my thoughts and ideas and opinions will be to promote a dialogue about the changes and opportunities facing the Israeli and the American Jewish community. As we explore these possibilities, I won't comment too much on American politics, but as you know, I think that on many, many levels we face challenges. The question is, as an American Jewish community and the Israeli Jewish community, and the real question is how we're going to turn those to opportunities, or at least to growth. Okay, so as you all know, Israel voted 2 weeks ago. And in many ways, it really was a celebration of democracy. It was a wonderful day in Jerusalem. The sun was out, and it was weather at its Jerusalem best. I live in a small neighborhood that has both Arabs and Jews, and we vote so often that we turn it into a block party. People bring coffee and cake, and we high five, and it's kind of cool. We see babies, we comment about how much they've grown or not, and pregnancies, and there are teenage kids or young soldiers who are like 21 who voted 4 times already. It's a lot of fun. We have here the first picture that you can see. It's also some of the jokes. We think they're very funny, which is, and I'll read them for the people outside, which is that a government in Israel is like IKEA. You can elect it and then you don't know how to put it together, which actually is turning out to be true right now too. I'll talk about that in a minute. Israelis, like everyone else, love Groundhog Day. So we have Bill Murray saying, well, it's election day again. And of course, how could we be without our soup Nazi from Seinfeld, who's saying in Hebrew, politicians, no more elections for you. Come back in 4 years. We are very pleased. I'm glad you think it's funny. The next slide is just some of the pictures I took in the neighborhood. What you might want to notice is in the left is a picture from 1949. It's pretty scary how much they all look the same, don't they? We're still voting the same way. But as you can see, it was diverse. And there was a very high turnout across all sectors, 71% average turnout in Israel, which is a sign that Israeli citizens remain engaged in politics and want to say on what's going on despite the frequency of elections. It's actually higher than the last one. I was just asked if that's a normal level of turnout. It's higher than the last one, I believe, but yeah, it's a pretty high turnout for us. We have high turnouts, we've had lower ones. But to have 71%, even if that were low, relative, which it isn't, is pretty amazing considering it's the fifth time. I mean, like you would think we'd had it, right? And in that sense, it's all very much a celebration of democracy. But I have to admit, not everybody's celebrating, and I'm not celebrating. Israel is a very fractured, very divided society. And in a divided society, I can't stay neutral. I don't think anyone can. Even if I believed in what some people seem to think is objective journalism, which I don't, I believe in fair journalism. As a citizen, as someone who lives there, neutrality isn't possible. I don't think it's desirable. And so the presentation I will bring to you tonight is going to be my presentation. Other people might interpret what I'll bring differently. It reflects my concerns as an Israeli Jew, as a Zionist, as a feminist, as the daughter of a modern Orthodox rabbi who had pulpits in conservative synagogues. I am now an active, committed Reform Jew in Israel. I'm the daughter of refugees who came from Europe. And I'm not celebrating because the values that I believe in are threatened. And I'm very concerned about the future of Israeli democracy. And given that situation, I can only bring you what I see and what I believe. I think many of you are concerned also. You can know, for instance, that the Kotel Agreement, the egalitarian space by the wall, which is being held back anyway, is just not going to happen. We'll be lucky if we retain what we've had. I doubt it. NGOs, non-governmental organizations that some of you may be familiar with, will be under threat. Certainly they're budgeting from the government. Some of them, most of them don't take any money from the government, but those that do, it will be cut. Palestinian citizens of Israel will feel threatened. I don't anticipate any actual legislation in the near future, but I think they'll feel threatened. They already do. And I know that many of you are concerned as well. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is I'm going to present how the system works, what are the takeaways from the election, why I'm so concerned, and what we can all do together. I'll try to be fair. I'll try to be analytic. I'll bring what I know as a journalist and an academic, and I'll bring myself as well. Okay, so how does Israel vote? Well, if you flip the side and what we see here, Israel votes, startup nation, high-tech nation, votes with little pieces of paper. We put little pieces of paper into paper envelopes that are then stuffed into a box and counted by hand. So that is a little unusual for a high-tech nation. We don't do, I know that there are places and other places that vote, but we're the ones who pride ourselves on automatic everything, and the only thing that isn't automated practically is our elections. No. How's the political system work? Okay, the way it works is, and if you flip to this side, we have a Knesset that's elected with 120 members. The Knesset, by the people. The Knesset appoints, or doesn't appoint, it actually approves or confirms the prime minister who creates a government. Okay? That means that without a majority of the Knesset, which has to confirm the government can't function. And that's crucial to understand. Your president can function even if he or she doesn't have a majority, if his or her party doesn't have a majority. It's rough, it's everything that we know it can be, but it can function. The Knesset is sovereign over the government and can therefore topple the government, which is why you have to remember a magic number. The magic number to understanding Israeli politics is 61, exactly. 61 is half plus one of the 120-seat connection. So it's nice to know that Israeli politics are ultimately about arithmetic. Israel votes on a nationwide proportional system. That means that voters cast their votes for a party, not for a person. The percentage of votes that a party receives translates into the number of seats that the parties will have in the Knesset. That means if a party got 50% of the vote, it would receive 60 seats. But there's a caveat. To be part of the Knesset, each party must pass a threshold. That means that they must receive at least 3.25% of the votes cast, which is 4 seats in the Knesset. The reason for that is that, as crazy as it is, imagine if there were parties with 1 or 2 seats. There were. It was increased in order to prevent that from happening. So what you have is, if you look at your next piece, is what you have is a Knesset that looks something like this. Actually, it's kind of really like this, where they sit in a half circle. And the different colors represent the different parties, okay? And that's what the Knesset can look like.
Just so, this is a parliamentary system. How similar or different is it from the British, the Italians, Germans, other parliamentary systems?
It's similar and different. I'm not enough of an expert on their systems to know all the intricacies, but parliamentary governments are approved ultimately by the parliament. That's the difference. And that's the key difference. I don't know enough to tell you more, and there are certainly people who do. I do know that in terms of how often we vote, we beat out everybody else. Spain and Greece used to beat us out, but we beat them out now for voting the most often. But Britain has the record for the shortest tenure of a prime minister. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Okay, there's...
You vote for one party, one of those pieces of paper representing a party, that's all you get.
Yes. There was an attempt once, I'm sorry. There was an attempt once to split the vote between a prime minister, voting for the prime minister, and for parties casting a 2-piece of paper vote. It was a disaster. I mean, it was worse. If I can just answer the... I don't want to get into too much political science here, but all democracies have to balance between stability and representativeness, or representationalness. In America, you have a much more stable government. I don't know, after January 6th, but you do have a stable government. There are 2 parties. Nobody can bring down anyone other than impeachment, which is, kind of much more complicated. And that even doesn't undo the Congress. So it's a very stable system. Is it representational? You could argue, of course, that 2 parties can't possibly comprise all of the different things that people are concerned about. And I don't get to vote for the thing that matters the most to me. I mean, if I would say that the thing that matters most to me is LGBTQ rights or women's rights or the environment. I don't have a party representing that. I have a very complicated platform in a two-party system in which I have to make a lot of compromises, if in fact I even know.
So how do you do that in Israel with 35 choices? How do you can't even know?
Allow me to correct you, this time it was 40.
Thank you.
How do you do that? Well, that's the problem, and I think that I'll get to this in a moment, but I think that in divided societies, it's the challenge that we're all facing, whether they be two-party systems or multi-party systems, presidential systems or parliamentary systems, which is that because there was a theory, at least, that there was enough consensus that you could vote for a party that would more or less represent your primary interests, and those parties would have broad ideological positions on a broad number of topics. When countries are as divided as many countries are now, the balance is off, but it's off in a two-party system as well. I don't know that we understand the political science yet knows what to do in highly divided societies. This is a fairly new phenomenon. As we all know, even not so long ago, Fukuyama talked about the end of history. We're done. It's okay, and we're just going to continue on positively. And look where we are now. So my answer to you is, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. I don't think people feel that the American system is stable in a social or socioeconomic meaning. I certainly don't think people in France feel that their society is stable. We see what just happened in Italy. I don't have an answer. If who was it? I think it was Churchill who said democracy is the worst system. It's just better than all the others. But even now, that needs to be amended. Rabbi, you had a question.
I just wanted to mention, I thought you'd like to hear that the leader of the American Jewish community was at a reception when the UN General Assembly was meeting in September with the Italian foreign minister, and he said Israel's becoming like Italy because of the number of elections. So,
I think we beat them out.
anyway, he was joking, if you can joke about these things.
I think you have to, because I'm not sure what else we could do, but
Parties all publish what their key platforms are so that you can go in somewhat informed.
they are supposed to. Yes. I'm sorry, the question, the streamers, the people on stream as well. The question was, do the parties publish platforms that spell out all their positions on various? Some do, some don't. You'll be interested in knowing that the Likud, which is the largest party, which is Netanyahu's party, did not. No. That is the other wild card in politics, I think, everywhere, which is the growth of identity politics. A system that was predicated on the idea of voting for a party and not for an individual has now coalesced around, identity, but identity that's led by a leader. And so now we have this kind of very confused situation of actually voting for individuals. But not really, because you don't vote for the individual, you cast your vote for a party, but the party is led by an individual. And that's another phenomenon of politics throughout the world. So let me show you in this slide, and I'll read it out. I'm sorry, these are in the wrong order. But what I want you to look at is the results of the elections. Okay? There were 39 parties, 40 parties. There were 39 in 2021, and 10 got in. Okay? Just a few that you should note is 32 for the Likud, 24 for Yair Lapid, 14 for religious Zionism, and two parties that came very close to the threshold but did not make it in are Meretz, the liberal human rights party, and Balad, which is an Arab party. Habayit HaYehudi by Ayelet Shaked didn't come close, which was or was not a surprise to many people. What you can see, though, is that Netanyahu can easily put together a coalition. Flip to this page. With 4 parties, which is supposed to be reasonable. It's not unwieldy. There have been coalitions with 8 and 9. That's a bit unwieldy. With 4 parties, his own 32, 14 from religious Zionism, 11 from Shas, which is the ultra-Orthodox party for the Mizrahim, for the Sfaradim, and 7 for Yadut Torah, which is an amalgam of the Ashkenazi religious parties. You can see that he can put together a coalition that easily crosses the 61. But each party is going to have its demands, and some of them will be very difficult, and I'll talk about that more as we go on, but this is where the horse trading starts. Or, excuse the expression from American politics, since neither Muslims nor Jews eat pork, but it's called pork barreling in American politics. That's what's going on now. Netanyahu had thought that he would announce his government tomorrow. He's not even close. Right now they're stalled. It's at an impasse, and we'll talk about that. So why did we get into elections this time? Well, as I said, 61 is the magic number. It's a necessary condition, but it's not a necessary requirement, but it's not a sufficient requirement. In addition to 61, you need stability, because in 61, any papa becomes a king. Anybody who bolts, anybody who says, I don't support you, we're out. In theory, of course, this isn't the reason, but one of the real reason, but one of the reasons that the government fell was the issue of chametz being brought into hospitals for non-Jews. Somebody bolted over that. That's not true. It is true, but of course there were other reasons for this, okay? But you understand that 61 is a simple majority, but it's also really unstable. And this government was, over the years, Bibi has either been unable to form a coalition at all, or unable to form a stable coalition. And each time he propelled the country into elections, hoping he'd get a better deal from the electorate, and he didn't. In the last election, that's 2021, former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, whose party actually only had 6 seats out of the 120, go figure that, managed to do the arithmetic, and he added up to 61. But his party was so diverse and so conflicted. Ostensibly, they agreed to focus on domestic issues, which they did, and they had some serious achievements. But largely, they were so diverse that the government pretty much imploded from the weight of its own diversity, and we had elections again. So what were the 2022 elections about? Well, I can tell you what they were not about. I can tell you that they weren't about the peace process. They weren't about inflation. They weren't about Jerusalem, Iran, the climate crisis, the degradation of the quality of our services, public services. They weren't about the increase in violence, increase in frequency and intensity of both Palestinian and settler violence. Basically, what they were is about, initially, they were about Bibi. And as we love to call it in the foreign press, and that's where this slide comes in, you'll see this was something that appeared very frequently in the press. This is King Bibi, and of course, the people trying to topple the statue with a clear reference to those of us who've seen it from the end of the former Soviet Union. What's that? Yeah, or as we love to call it in the foreign press, to Bibi or not to Bibi. Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you like that. As it became clear, though, that the ultra-right was gaining strength, the elections very much became about the ultra-right, and we'll talk about that. I want to make two notes on what you're seeing on this slide of what this, go back to where you were, of what this election was about and not about, and what we got, okay? What we have is, as I showed you, the coalition and the opposition. In the coalition, the second largest party, which is the third largest party in the country, is religious Zionism, which is really a misnomer. It's a combination of three smaller parties dominated by one of its constituent groups known as Jewish Power, headed by neo-Kahanist Itamar Ben-Gvir. They are, as I said, the third largest party in the country, the second largest party in the coalition. And that's something we should all pay attention to. But as we look at this and see, 64 votes, 64 seats and all of this, I want to point something else out to you. If you include the two parties, Militz and Balad, the two Arab parties, the one Arab party that did not get in, but both parties came very, very close to the threshold. Then what we have is that 48.92% of the country voted center-left, and 48.36% voted right or religious. Now, that's not going to be expressed in the government, because in the same way, and again, those of you who are legal experts, or constitutional experts, excuse me, but it's a little similar to the way the Electoral College doesn't always reflect the popular vote. Things happen when there are permutations and additions and arithmetic. So because of this arithmetic, this division is not reflected. But to think that Israel massively voted to the right, it's scary. It is 10%. But I wouldn't want to say that Israel massively voted to the right, and I'm not sure exactly what that right means. But think about this. If we have the ultra-Orthodox who are demanding seats such as the Treasury, and there's some noise about them demanding the seats for the Ministry of Education, we will have people whose school systems do not study math, history, social sciences, or English running the education system. We may have a finance minister who has been indicted 3 times for corruption. We may have a head of the military, of the Defense Department, and or internal security, who not only didn't serve in the army, one of them, Ben-Gvir, was rejected by the army because he was too extreme. And they're demanding the defense. How did we get this result? And what does it tell us? Well, I'm going to give you 3 levels of explanations. One are the simple political science explanations, and they're real. In highly divided societies, elections are not decided only by ideology, not even only by by identity politics. They're also decided by tactics. And That's true everywhere, where the parties decide to put their money, where they decide to campaign, where they decide not to campaign, where they invest efforts. And Bibi, or Netanyahu, excuse me, it's just I say Bibi because it's automatic, is one of the best campaigners ever. He just, whatever you think of him, he is a master tactician. And he just won his 6th term as prime minister. You have to be fairly good at tactics to do that, to pull that off. However, he built a political strategy based on breaking down the political community into its already antagonistic components. He incited against the left, against Arabs. He created a situation where anybody who didn't agree with him was a traitor. And eventually this began because of the highly divided society and because of the fears and the identity politics that we've all talked about. It worked. It became, well, I can't vote for Bibi because I'm not part of that, or I can't not vote for him because I am not a traitor, or not whatever not a lefty. Lefty became a very bad word. In fact, it was Netanyahu who convinced the 3 extremist parties that compose religious Zionism to run together. It's unlikely that alone they would have passed the threshold. He convinced them to run together, and he granted them legitimacy, he and parts of the press. So that Ben-Gvir, for instance, Netanyahu was asked if Ben-Gvir would be a minister 3 weeks before the elections. He was asked if Ben-Gvir could be a minister in his government. He said, oh no, he's not fit to be a minister. Lo matim. But 3 days before the elections, he said he could certainly be a minister when it became clear that he was going to have to count on them to form his coalition. Another political science type explanation for what we're seeing now is that 130,000 votes went to the other 30 parties that ran. Like, one of them is the Pirates Party, and I really did try to find out who these people are and what they stand for.
Like Dutch, isn't it a Dutch hacker party that maybe proliferated in other countries?
No, because they've run before. There's a pro-marijuana party when medical cannabis is legal. So, you know, and nobody gets arrested for weed. So, you know, what are we talking about here? But 130,000 votes went to these people. And it's kind of like, you know, we talk about 2 Jews, 3 opinions, 120 seats, 40 parties. You know, it's kind of the same thing. Those are wasted votes. But if you want to say that you can vote for what you think, well, it's an option. We also had the lack of leftover agreements, a tactical error in retrospect. Many thought so at the time on the part of the Labour Party and some of the other parties. Leftover agreements mean that if a party almost gets in, the leftover votes go to a party that they agree with. That might have pushed Labour up a bit. Not clear. Not clear that it would have mattered, but it would have mattered how strong the opposition would have been, how it would have mattered in the sense of feeling of loss. Another level of explanation is the world that we just talked about. I mean, you can't detach Israel from what's going on in the rest of the world, just as you can't detach any other country. We can look at Bolsonaro, who just got unelected, but we'll see what that means, in Brazil. We can look at Orban in Hungary, Duterte, Philippines, Duda in Poland, Meloni in Italy, and so forth. We're looking at the growth of illiberal democracies. New phenomenon, and you know, if Israel's supposed to be simultaneously a light unto the nations and a nation like all other nations, well, I guess we get to get our demagogues and our reactionary populist leaders too. But having said that, I want to give you some other observations or potential explanations that have more to do with Israel specifically and less kind of theoretical. First of all, what does the voter turnout tell us? 71% of people who aren't sick of voting. And, you know, we all think it was very funny when we said, not knowing if we're quoting Al Capone or Richard Daley, vote early, vote often. We complained that we said that we didn't have to bring IDs to vote because the voting poll, the booth already recognizes us and say, oh, you're back? You know, I know what you vote, here's your piece of paper. The elections also became miserably strategic and soulless, and I'll share from my own family. My husband and I were both concerned about two parties that might not pass the threshold. And so we said, okay, one of us votes for one party and one of us votes for the other. And I said, well, I'm not voting for that party. And I would say, well, do you want it not to pass the threshold? No, it should be in. I just don't want it to, I don't want to cast my vote for it. So we tossed a coin, and I lost. But after I lost, I went to vote earlier and then texted him and say, I did it anyway. So, but joking aside about, you understand that part of that joking was because it was so soulless. It was so not motivated by anything except arithmetic and a concern of this party has to be in even if I don't like it. And yet people voted. So, but what did they get? Well, I have to be critical of the center left. It ran a campaign with almost no focus on its own achievements. That government had achievements. It handled the pandemic. It handled the economy. Things were getting better. Yes, we're suffering from inflation. There is a world out there of which we are part of. And the strong shekel is killing in some ways anything that has to do, of course, with imports. But on the other hand, there were a lot of things that were working. The infrastructure was working. And they didn't run on any of that. Nor did they present a clear campaign about security, social justice, when we know that the gaps in Israel are among the highest. The gaps between the poor and the rich are among the highest in the OECD. That is what they ran on. They ran a campaign based on two things. One was what we call a Gewalt campaign, and the word is used in Hebrew and Yiddish. In other words, Oi Gewalt, I might not make it in, please vote for me. Very convincing. The funniest one was to listen to the Arab party that did get in, Mansour Abbas, use in Arabic the word Gewalt in Yiddish. A Gewalt campaign is throw me a Hail Mary pass, save me, any of those expressions, and we know how they play out. More importantly, it was a campaign that was tremendously dismissive of the voters of Bibi, not of Bibi. In the United States in sociology, that it allied with what in the States is known as the paradox, or the great paradox even, which is why are people voting against their best interests? That's a statement by the liberal left that says that I know better than other people for whom they should vote. And if they are voting, and I'm sure you've heard this vis-a-vis Trump, if they are voting for Trump, if they are voting for Bibi, they're all stupid or dumb or whatever we want to call them. If they only knew the truth, they would do what I think is best. That is also a campaign that will reinforce identity politics. It will push people away. And we have to think about this, and I'll talk about this in my conclusions of where we're going with all of this. Having said all of this, let there be no doubt. Itamar Ben-Gvir is a follower of the teachings of Meir Kahane. He was convicted by an Israeli court in 2007 of incitement to riot.
What party is he again?
Religious Zionism. He's head of the Religious Zionist Party. In the past, he's been careful to distance himself. He said kind of a mea culpa, I'm more mature than I was, and this kind of stuff. And then last week went to a funeral, not a funeral, a memorial for Kahana, where he announced that Kahana was actually all about love for the Jewish people. I don't think that the people have suddenly become ideologically right, extreme right, but I think that the right provided simple messages. It played to our fears. It played to the idea that strength is an ultimate Jewish value, and that strength is not only a value, it's a value that must be shared, it must be demonstrated and shown. It speaks to the paradoxical feelings that many Jews have if we combine events like the Holocaust and the 1967 Six Days War, this very convoluted identity of both a sense of superiority and a deep sense of victimhood. That's very much part of the Jewish psyche in Israel and I think in the world. And on the one hand, you know, there's a lot of dismissal of others, of the goyim, and on the other hand, a lot of fear. Much of it, of course, justified, but it's this complex connection between the two in our psyches that they played on. If you look here, one of the things that Ben-Gvir did was he actually appeared at a demonstration wielding a gun. And I don't know why I'm not seeing. Yeah, sorry about that. He appeared at a conference, at a demonstration, holding a gun. I seem to have had a bad copy here. At a demonstration in Jerusalem in which there were Jews, Jewish Israelis, Palestinian Israelis, and East Jerusalemites in the middle of the city. He said he felt threatened. That's the point. When you feel threatened, you pull a gun. His wife appeared yesterday at a meeting with Sarah Netanyahu and the wives of the other heads, the four wives of the heads of the four parties, with a gun in her skirt waistband. I'm not even going to get into the halacha of, which I actually once looked at, of if women are supposed to bear guns. But she's making a statement. I'm not even going to talk about how she got into a meeting with the future prime minister's wife with a gun, but she did. And this is what they're calling for. Internal security, encouraging disloyal Arabs to leave, the death penalty for terrorists, using live fire against Palestinian rioters, including within Israel, immunity from prosecution for IDF soldiers for military actions. That means that includes rogue soldiers. I think all of this is playing on two sets of fears. First of all, the great fears left by the Second Intifada, which most of us don't want to think about anymore. And it's very interesting how the Second Intifada kind of sort of disappeared from the discourse. Nobody wants to talk about it. And then in May 2021, last May, or a year ago last May, the unrest between Arabs and Jews in the cities, in the mixed cities. 2 Arabs and 2 Jews were killed, hundreds were injured, and thousands were arrested, most of them Arabs. Among Arabs, this reinforced a sense of discrimination and threat. Among Jews, it led to fears about the enemy within. If our neighbors can come up against us, what does this mean? Are they a fifth column? And fear of dependence on Arabs in the government when the current government was in fact had an Arab party within the government and an Arab minister. Now, some of us thought that that's amazingly wonderful. Diversity, growth, integration, inclusiveness. Others were frightened. And I'm going to share something that I'm not proud of, but I think it's human, and I think that to deny it isn't real. During the second Intifada, my kids were in just beginning junior high school and the end of grade school. And something went off in Jerusalem, and I mistakenly thought my children were nearby. Spoiler, I was misinformed. They were nowhere near and everything is fine. But I didn't know that then. The phone systems are cut. First of all, they crash because everybody's trying to call everybody else. Then they're cut to prevent the use of cell phones to hit first responders, because cell phones have been used to set off bombs for first responders. And I became very aware within myself of a feeling of I don't care about human rights. I don't care about collective punishment. All I care about is keeping my family safe. Want to arrest them all? Arrest them all. I don't care. I just need to know that my family's safe. Now, I have umpteen years of education, umpteen years of training to separate thought from feeling. I also live a privileged life, not wealthy or elitist, but we travel, we have agency. The global world isn't a threat to me. If I could feel that way and then summon up all these years and all this sense of this isn't who I am, what happens to people who have less experience, less opportunities, who are frightened anyway? And what are we offering them? And I'm saying this without justifying in any way the positions of religious Zionism, but I am saying that there's a psyche here that's wounded. And it comes from somewhere. You know, there really is a saying, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. I also, however, having played on all of this, people may not have voted for Ben Gvir and his party because they really accepted what he stands for, you know, all the things that I just read. That doesn't mean he won't act on them. I mean, I might have thought, you know, yeah, you won't really do that, but he might. There's already an organization in Bat Yam, a civilian militia, armed, to protect our homes. Now, that didn't happen after the rioting in 2021. There was rioting in Bat Yam. I think it happened because it's been given permission. It's been given legitimacy. And that's where the danger is, as much as the provocative and the provocations. I also think that the center-right has given up on Judaism. In many ways, what happened in Israel is one of the divides is that the right took religion. So when even like in the New York Times piece by the more recent one by Kingsley, Patrick Kingsley talks about Israel becoming more Jewish. Excuse me, what's so Jewish about ultra-Orthodoxy? First of all, you know, if we want to get into it, it's a historical aberration. It's actually not authentic. They're fighting the Enlightenment. But what about our Judaism? And what happened is that it's as though the right and the ultra-Orthodox took over Judaism and we took over what's left, which is human rights and individual rights, which are actually also grounded in Judaism. But we didn't use that language, and that language matters a lot. And I know how impressed people were, for instance, when Gilad Kariv, who is a rabbi, an ordained rabbi in the Reform movement, as well as a lawyer, in Knesset meetings that he chaired, insisted on opening with a Dvar Torah. And the ultra-Orthodox were outraged, but so were the liberals, as though this is what? This isn't ours? Yes, it is. And this is something we're going to have to face very strongly. Let me tell you what concerns me the most. One, what's going to happen to our legal system? There are two things here, or several things here. One is that these parties are insisting, all four of them, well, three of them, and the Likud is certainly going to go with it, that the breach of trust crime be repealed. The law that defines breach of trust should be repealed. Bibi is currently on trial, not investigation, trial for breach of trust. Fraud, corruption, and breach of trust. The law is probably worded badly. I will give them that. But if you take away breach of trust as a crime, you're leaving open season for corruption. No less importantly, or even more importantly, it's a get-out-of-jail-free card for Netanyahu. We have a system built on judges, not juries. No judge will continue a trial over a law that no longer exists. That's insane. How do you stand trial for a law that's no longer on the books, even if it was on the books when you did it? But it's like the kind of some version of retroactive. Basically what it'll be, a get out of jail free. And there's not a small amount of thought that that's exactly what's behind all of this. No less of concern is the override clause, which some of you have been hearing about. We do not have a constitution. Instead of a constitution, over the past few years, the Knesset has past 30 years actually, the Knesset has passed a series of laws known as basic laws that have defined basic human rights and the basic structure of the country. It defines the separation of the branches of government. It defines human rights. It defines human dignity, which, by the way, is interesting and I think very positive. Not only liberty, but dignity, which is important, and other kinds of rights. The Supreme Court has therefore acted. It's really the High Court of Justice, it's a derivative of the British system, has acted to look at government actions, programs, or laws passed by the Knesset if they pass muster according to the provisions of the basic laws. That was a decision made by the Supreme Court. There is no basic law that says that a basic law is the basis for rejection, okay? However, what they're proposing is that if the Supreme Court rejects a law, action, on the basis of a basic law or international law, which Israel rarely uses, it can be overridden by a simple majority of the Knesset. That means we don't like it, we go back to the Knesset and change it. That is like saying not only would the Supreme Court no longer have the right for judicial review on the basis of the Constitution, but that the Constitution could be changed by a simple majority, not amended, changed, struck down. This is rule by majority, but it's tyranny of the majority. Yes, majority rule is an important principle of democracy. So is defense of the minority. And they're forgetting this. This is looking very strongly like an illiberal democracy. I'm going to go quickly because we took some time for questions. I'm concerned about our foreign policy. I'm concerned Netanyahu had pulled the government towards, he was buddy-buddy with Modi in Italy, in India, and Bolsonaro, and Hungary, Duterte. Lapid had tried to pull Israel back. We'll have to see where that goes. I'm very concerned about the United States. After Ben Gvir attended the memorial service for Kahana, Ned Price, State Department spokesperson, released a statement saying, "Celebrating the legacy of a terrorist organization is abhorrent. We urge all parties to maintain calm, exercise restraint, and refrain from actions that only serve to exacerbate tensions, and that includes in Jerusalem." The government isn't even in power yet, and the United States is already saying, we don't know how we're going to work together. I'm worried, as I said, about the power of the ultra-Orthodox parties, and what are they in favor of? They have already said that they will increase the subsidies to the yeshivas, which means, of course, men studying and not working. That will decimate the economy even more. It will also create tremendous bitterness because those of us who do work are funding them. I'm worried about the fear and the values of our country. What are we going to be? What kind of a country are we going to be? David Hartman talks about the need that there are two kinds of Jews, and that we have to we need both, but the question, of course, is the balance. So the Jews of Auschwitz and the Jews of Sinai. The Jews of Auschwitz know that survival matters above all. The Jews of Sinai remember that at Sinai, we were given the Torah, which among its many commandments, the most common and the most oft-repeated commandment in its various forms is the one that calls for kindness, compassion, social justice, care for the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. Are we going to become an Armageddon, just watching all the personal human rights and liberties rolled back? We will have 9 women in the coalition. We have more in the Knesset, but we will have 9 women in the coalition. One of the men in the coalition is an open homophobe and ran. He's part of religious Zionism and ran on a ticket of anti-LGBTQ. Is this the kind of country we want to live in? It's not the kind of country I want to live in. I'm concerned about the relationships with the American Jewish community. I'm concerned that you're going to write us off. I'm very concerned that one of the things that the parties want to do is change what's known as the grandfather clause in the law of return. The law of return states that if your grandfather was a Jew, so are you. But now they're going to decide who's a Jew, who gets to be called a Jew. And that means that if your grandfather was converted by a non-Orthodox rabbi who's not on an approved list in Israel, your child or you could not be considered a Jew in Israel. That includes for aliyah, that includes for marriage. So we've got a lot to be concerned about here. I want to talk to you about the relationship that I'd like to see for us together and what I think you can do and what we can do. And with that, I'll conclude. There's a lot of thought about, Israel right or wrong. I don't think that's real love. I don't think that's partnership. I think it's offensive to both sides. Yeah, I expect the Jews of the world will rally behind us when we're seriously facing existential threats and we're unfairly judged in the world court. But I also think that to love is to criticize. In fact, in Vayikra, in Leviticus, we're told thou shalt not hate thy neighbor, thy brother in their heart. Thou shalt surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him. We are called upon to criticize out of love. That's real partnership. So please support Israel when you think that we're at risk, but support us when that risk comes from within too. That's mature relationship. We're past, 48. We're a very strong country. We're doing okay that way. Are we doing so okay internally? That's where I think we need you. The atmosphere after the elections in my feed on Facebook, which is a bubble, but among all my friends, we watched the exit polls on Tuesday, 2 weeks ago in the airport. We voted and then got on a plane to come here. And the exit polls are known to be fairly good. And my husband, who was born and bred in Israel and served in 73 war and in 82 war, said, "It's not the country I lived in. It's not the country I was born into." And everybody was saying that. Or everybody, of course, in my world. That's changed. What's happened over the past 2 weeks has been a strong sense of determination. That in fact the country isn't going down the tubes. The game isn't over as long as we're playing. There are more than 250 civil society organizations working in Israel right now on inclusivity, on human rights, on dialogue not only with Palestinians but between ultra-Orthodox and secular Jews. I don't know if any of you saw the picture, it was kind of cute. That there was somebody from Meretz and an ultra-Orthodox said, would he lay tefillin? I guess it was Chabadnik, they go around encouraging men to put on tefillin. And he said, I'll wear tefillin if you'll wear a Meretz sticker. And he did. He said, I think what he said was something like, I believe in the Meretz sticker like you believe in the tefillin, but we can at least show respect for each other. And there's a lovely picture about that. But more seriously, I can tell you in Jerusalem, and as a journalist, I'm partly guilty for this, that mostly you see in Jerusalem the intolerance and the violence and the riots and the stones. Well, I live in Jerusalem that's very different. It's Jerusalem where art and theater and music are flourishing, where all sorts of experiments in new forms of Judaism are flourishing, where Arabs and Jews are trying really hard. I consult to an organization where Arabs and Jews meet together on the seam line. It's a city where if you don't sign up real early, you will not get a place in courses for Arabic or courses for Hebrew. There is a flourishing of trying to understand each other in Israel. And there are, as I said, over 250 organizations. So what am I calling on you to do? First of all, inform yourselves. Second, encourage the debate. And I want to thank the rabbi and Aliyah for allowing me to speak here, because in so many congregations, Israel isn't allowed to be talked to about. Yes, bring somebody else who doesn't agree with me. Please. Obviously, I want my, what I believe in to take over. I want all the good stuff that I think is good. But seriously, we're divided. Allow that debate to come in. Allow that debate to be within your community as well. Write letters to the editor. As an editor, I'm telling you, we read letters to the editor. Write letters to the editor. Write to your congresspeople, but most of all within your community. Inform yourselves. Talk, debate, argue. Let's all learn how to argue. I don't think any of us anymore know how to do that very well. Visit. It's really important to Israelis that you visit also not just all the historical places, which matter. I mean, it does matter to me that when I used to drive the carpool, I drove past the old city, and you can get jaded, but I'm not. It does something when I drive by the walls. It means something to me. But that's not all that's there. Come see the life. Support us financially, but also support us with your moral support, and together we can learn something. This experiment isn't over. We're reading Chayei Sarah, is the parasha that we're reading this week. And I don't know if you know, but little Israeli kids call dodgeball Chayei Sarah. The reason, of course, is that what happens in Chayei Sarah, she dies. And what happens if you get hit by the dodgeball? You're out. It's a small example of how Israel's the place where Hebrew and our access to the sources is really there. And I don't think, as the child of immigrants and refugees, I don't think we have the right to give up yet. We're only, we're not even 100 years old. In country time, that's toddlers. And so I'm calling on you, I'm thanking you, and I'm calling on you to join us. These are rough times for us all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eeta, for being with us. The live stream is about to go off. We are, I think what might be better than a question and answer maybe is just, since we're a small group here, that over some refreshments, if people have questions, we can do that. And there are refreshments in the back, so we'll go in the back.
Cool.
And we thank everyone who is here with
Thank you
us
all.
on live stream, and have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.